Welcome to By-The-Bywater, a podcast on the Megaphonic Network. I'm Ned Raggett.
I'm Oriana Schwint.
I'm Jared Pekacek.
And we're here to talk about all things J.R.R. Tolkien, his work, his inspirations and impact, creative interpretations in other media, languages, lore, rip-offs, parodies, anything we think is interesting. Thanks for joining us. Hello and welcome to the 58th episode of By-The-Bywater. It is great to be back with you all. It is the first episode of 2024. Strictly speaking, we're still in 2023 as we record this, but just a few hours to go and it's 2024 elsewhere. So, there you go. And we'll take it from there. And no, we're not recording this in lieu of doing things for New Year's Eve. We're just doing this beforehand. Because if we did this tomorrow, what states would we all be in? Even if we were just tired, I'm sorry. We hope you're well. We hope you very much enjoyed, if you are Patreon subscribers to Megaphonic, our appearance on the greatest podcast ever told, special episode on Scrooge, the 1971, which we hope to never think about again. But boy, that was an experience. You'll never think of hell quite the same way again.
I don't know. I'm still thinking about the phrase Christmas cream.
Oh, yeah. No, that came to mind again today.
Why? Why did you? Oh, man. I had forgotten.
Hear our reaction to that and other horrors. Again, subscribe to our Patreon and to the overall network Patreon, please. And you'll have a chance to hear that and our previous episode last year from the previous year as well. But that's all to the side because here we are, 2024 almost-ish, and as we record. And I won't ask what our plans for the New Year's are. I think collectively we'll all say, let's get through this next year in one piece, please. However we want to do that. And hopefully we'll all have, many good news and many good things coming soon, including, of course, half a year's time from now, a certain book, which we will again hype up.
Please pre-order The West Passage by Jared Pekacek.
Please do.
Yes.
Please do.
Please do.
I keep it's happened twice, seeing people be like, this is on my most anticipated reads for 2024. And I'm like, aww.
That's so nice.
That is so nice. Little old me.
That is how it should be. And it's on mine too. So, but we will speak even more about it the closer the time gets. But in the meantime, we have stuff to talk about, including some actual news. Well, you'll have more to hear about this in a second. So, Jared, please take us away.
Sorry.
Get your giggles out now. I fully understand.
Just leave this in.
Yeah.
So stupid. It's been a little quiet as the previous year wrapped up on the news front, though on a scholarly note, we'd like to call attention to a forthcoming British Library streaming event on January 9th, 21st Century Tolkien, which will feature the author of the recent book of that name, Nick Groom, as well as noted Tolkien scholar Demetrious and illustrator John Howe, among others. We'll put a pre-order link in the show notes, but there is one other thing we have to talk about for the sheer sad hilarity. So stupid.
Jared can't get through this. He can't get through it.
I couldn't get through. So if you remember the live Portland episode, I couldn't get through it then either, because this is, for some reason, this is the funniest thing that has ever happened in Tolkien news to me personally, and I don't know why. So one of the news items there was about a guy who had published a fanfic book. The first of it was supposed to be a series that was a straight up unauthorized sequel to The Lord of the Rings called The Fellowship of the King, and it went on from there. We still can't get over the detail of the Shire having cotillions. What the hell? Suffice to say that said dude, the truly amazingly named Demetrious Polychron, proceeded to sue the Tolkien estate and Amazon for the Rings of Power supposedly ripping him off. And basically, we were just all waiting for this to play out as expected, which is what happened when an initial judgment came down in August telling him to pack sand. And now, as of a few weeks back, the book can't be sold anywhere, and all copies of it have to be destroyed, including any that he might have personally, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Especially after... Anyway, in case you're feeling bad about this, really, please don't. Especially after you read Daniel Wu's article for the Washington Post. We'll provide a gift link in the show notes, where, among other things, it was revealed that Polychron wanted to write a 7-book series that could be adapted into 21 films.
No, it couldn't. No.
Wow. But just the sheer, that article, boy, the brass of this guy.
I kind of admire it in a way, but it's also clearly just levels of self-delusion and only bees can perceive.
First of all, more like deleterious Polychron.
But
I've been waiting. I've been sitting on that one. So had to get that out. But also, is this level of delusion feels almost concerning in terms of like, should he be under a doctor's care? I hope he sees a mental health professional, because this is really like unhealthy for him. Especially, I actually started reading the book because it was one of the exhibits in the case.
Document.
Yeah, it's like a court document now. So I was like, well, okay, like how bad is this? And it's unbelievably bad.
It is.
I actually made it like 25 pages in. I don't know why.
How?
I was like procrastinating, I think. And
that would do it.
I was doing a lot of skimming, I think, but it was just like really, really, really just horrendous stuff beyond even the Kiernan stuff because that felt like it had like, I don't know, it was kind of coming from a point of view and a sincerity.
Yeah, it wasn't, it was so bad. Please don't mistake any of this recommendation.
Episode 13, if you want to catch back to that one.
It's a fun one. It's a fun one.
Yeah.
It's not just a rehash. He's not just trying to copy plot points. It's actually a continuation. And this is like, I think it's even noted somewhere, I think in the Washington Post article, that there's just like entire phrases or sentences that are just like copy pasted from Lord of the Rings. It's clearly, it's just rehashing Lord of the Rings with a new name.
Yeah.
And not even that new. Like Fellowship of the King, come on. Like really. That's the level of effort on every page.
Yeah, and the war of the ring to end all the wars of the rings, or something like that.
Yeah, we already had that. That's what the first book.
Yeah, what are you talking
That's
about?
what Lord of the Rings was.
You know, it's fine to write fanfic. I think that's great.
Yeah.
I love that urge. I love, like, you know, who among us has not been so taken with a world that you want to see more of it? And if you are a writer, you know, write more of it. That's fine. Post it on AO3.
Just don't try to sell it.
Exactly. Exactly.
No, yeah.
There is we had an entire episode about fan work, but like there is some fantastic fanfic out there. It's not that's not the issue. The issue is that you can't just sell and like to send it to like Simon Tolkien and be like, will you please?
Oh my god!
I want the kiss from Daddy on this. Like,
wow, just so that is bold. I mean, and clearly in terms of as reported in the Woo article, Simon Tolkien did exactly what you expect someone to ignore it, because any fanfic sent to a thing, it's sort of like going like, you know, slush pile. Yeah, you know, he's no fool.
You have to. I mean, if anybody doesn't know this already, you have to ignore this kind of thing so that if you come out with a future work, you can say accurately that you did not rip anybody off because you aren't reading anybody else's work based on your own, that you could then, you know, theoretically rip off for this. So, like, what?
Yeah.
What did he think was going to, if he operating under the assumption that he's not like literally dangerously delusional about this? Right. What did he think was going to happen? What was the end game here?
Was it trying to get attention?
Was it a publicity stunt?
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I'm really moved to, you know, read anything this guy might come up with now. So it's sort of like, there are a lot more worthwhile authors out there who are doing original work who I'd rather read. For a start. So
I can name one right off the top.
He comes to mind. But I mean, yeah, and per you know, both Jared and Nira and his points, the understand, you know, yes, worlds are great. You want to play around in them. But what's good about this is when you have things that take things on a different angle. I mean, not to beat a dead horse, but let's use an example from Star Wars here. Famously, everyone loves the Andor series precisely because it took a very different viewpoint on that universe and made it work due to the talents of the people involved and the approach they had to it. That's a kind of way to really expand out what you've got in a new direction. So many of the things that we've talked about, McKiernan is a good example in several ways, partially because, yes, even though he does repeat some tropes and beats, he at least was trying an extension of the original story rather than just simply retelling the original story. So, which is, you know, very important.
With Cotillion.
Yes, exactly. So, cotillions.
That's such a bananas detail to, I don't know. I feel like we're spending more time on this than we really should, but like cotillions, like that's such a specifically, to me, that feels specifically American.
Yeah.
In a way, like why not? You have a coming out ball in England. Even just do that.
Right.
instead of cotillion.
Okay, Hobbit society is modern, is sort of
gone with the Hobbit wind. I don't know. So
it's so weird. I don't know what that's doing there.
Yeah, well, again, we should probably, we've spent enough time at this thing.
We don't
expect
more thought on this book than the author did.
Yeah,
right.
We trust we will never hear about this ever again. So we'll just leave it at that.
In a sense, I kind of hope we do, because it's so, I find it so funny.
Right?
The unreleased works. Oh no! Imagine if he does go full fanfic and just release it out there. AO3, you don't know what's coming to you. So anyway,
they've seen worse.
I'm sure. Anyway,
I've seen worse on AO3. I don't even go looking for the bad stuff.
It just offers itself up to you. Yeah, so maybe we should be grateful. I don't know. Anyway, we should move on. We do have a topic, and we should get into that. Anyway, the topic of choice is mine to start off the new year here, and I will begin. The words of Chris Smith at the start of the new edition of the Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien say this in part. Letters has become the closest thing we can ever have to J.R.R. Tolkien's autobiography. It's absolutely true, and for that reason, since its original publication in the early 80s, as a collaboration between Tolkien's authorized biographer Humphrey Carpenter and his son and estate representative Christopher, the Letters has been a foundational source both for studies of his creative work as well as his personality and life. There have been numerous books about Tolkien beyond the official biography, of course, and Tolkien did offer up various brief formal statements here and there over the years as necessary. Perhaps most famously and movingly in his introduction to the revised edition of Lord of the Rings, where he speaks about how nearly all his close friends of his youth died in World War I. But as a combination of his own creative workings and the details of his days and thoughts as he chose to share them, without, of course, any sense that they would be formally published after his passing, the letters hold a unique place in his body of work as such. We've referred to various notable letters in the past, so perhaps it was time for a full plunge of sorts. Not that we're going to be able to talk about everything. It is, even for a Tolkien publication, a notably large volume. Part of this is due to the fact, as Smith further explains in his introduction, the original publication of the letters was itself a reduction from a larger prepared selection that was judged to be too large and unwieldy for printing and sale at that time. So it's not so much that new or undiscovered letters were added to the book that turned up after that original publication, as that the whole scope as selected and prepared by Carpenter and Christopher Tolkien originally is now properly available. Besides those further additions, around 150 more letters, a further 45 letters already in the edition were expanded. In what is honestly one of the most reassuring things about the book in and of itself, Smith's introduction also carefully notes that rather than disrupt the numbering system, which has since become a crucial shorthand for the discussion of the letters and fandom and scholarship since, his famous letter to Wilton Waldman about the origins of the legendarium remains, for instance, letter 131. The further added letters are distinguished by additional letters of the alphabet attached to the numbers after which they appear, ergo 100, 100A, 100B, etc. It's a small technical thing maybe, but it's unquestionably great to see. Given the scope and the range of the letters, trying to produce a full introduction is a bit of a mug's game. We'll take things as we go in our subsequent discussion of the book. But some general notes are of interest. First, it was clear that Tolkien was truly a great letter writer. He really loved doing it. He was absolutely comfortable with it on both a formal and as an informal means of communication. The tone shifts throughout are honestly among the most delightful touches given the presentation of the letters, where sweet sentimental messages to young family members or readers, or even more directly earnest ones to his children and dearest friends, can mix with sometimes crisp and often waspish responses to too eager readers or translators or the like who haven't clearly fully gotten his vibe, at least as he felt it. By default, this isn't every letter he wrote. For instance, at one point there's a mention about how one of his semi-regular correspondents, the British writer and poet W.H. Auden, usually trashed every letter he received after reading it, and neither is it everything he thought and felt, being neither a private record of his own thoughts in detail, nor a collection of his conversation. As a view into a life and aesthetic, though, it's invaluable. If there's one thing that remains partially obscure in the collection, it's the time of Tolkien's youth, his courtship and marriage to Edith Bratt, and in the concurrent war years he faced. The original selection of 4 letters to Edith and 1 to his friend, fellow soldier and TCBS member G.B. Smith, remains as is. No further letters, perhaps understandably, to Edith appeared after that in both the original and this edition, and the 5 letters total are the sole ones that are published which were written back in the 1910s. This period in Tolkien's life, and especially the role and thoughts of Edith herself, had been given some new attention in 2019 due to a since withdrawn article on her that had appeared in the Journal of Tolkien Research, J.R.R. Tolkien's inspiration for Luthien, the gallant Edith Bratt, which among other things indicated that there were still unpublished writings from the time, very possibly including further letters to and from Tolkien, which would cast a new and potentially different light on their relationship then, beyond the known work of what Carpenter did in the biography, and John Garth's further book, Tolkien and the Great War. Again, as the paper was withdrawn, it's entirely possible there's simply not really much more out there in terms of letters to start with. But given the retrospective importance of both his romance and the war to Tolkien's creative visions, it's still a distinct pity that there's no more from him then beyond his own creative works at the time. Whatever decisions were originally made by Christopher Tolkien and Carpenter then, and which the new editorial team has maintained, there's still plenty to delve into with the letters of interest, especially as people and particular concerns in his life appeared and then sometimes fell away, or took on new forms as further circumstances dictated. There's material in here that will still be discussed for a long time to come, and hey, it's our turn to add to it, so time for me to open up the floor. Well, where to begin? I mean, it's a chronological list of letters. It's almost sort of like, where does one begin? But I mean, I have some ideas, but any initial thoughts from either of you?
What an absolute nightmare this man would have been to work with. Like half of these letters start with some variation of, sorry, this is so late, but I was doing other things and not this work that you are expecting from me. Or it's like, oh, I was too busy with term, or I was ill, or someone was ill. And it's just like, oh my God, man. Like, is this what I sound like?
That's why I feel I've stopped giving, when I write an email or whatever, like apologizing for lateness, I've stopped giving reasons. I'm just like, thank you for your patience. Here's the thing that you wanted. Like, otherwise it'll be like that kind of thing where, oh, sorry, I was really busy.
You get a sense that he constantly, he was never at a point where he had a zero inbox, essentially is what it is, mentally or otherwise.
Oh my God, he's the equivalent of the guy with like 30,000 unread emails. And he's, oh no.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's tons of stuff that were reasonably not included that were utterly strictly professional that would be like absolutely no one would care, it's sort of like, per your meeting, etc., things like that, or probably
there are a few of those in here now. I mean, that were added, and it's like, you didn't need to add those.
I didn't need that.
They're just like...
Or they were originally included, and you wonder why they were originally included in the thing. So it makes sense that they were removed. Yeah. No,
my main feeling reading this was really like, I'm so glad that he's... We've expressed this sentiment before, but I'm so glad he's dead and not giving interviews currently because I don't want to know
yes
his opinions on some things. I didn't want to know some of the stuff that he says in the letters.
Mm-hmm.
And
let's plunge
everybody has things that they...
Well, let's plunge into the deep end here with some of this, especially as some of these letters, some of the now newly revealed, let's say, letters and all that truly delve into. And, there's been more attention on this. Oh, gee, Tolkien was Catholic? Yes, he was. A lot of people seem to be treating this as a revelation as opposed to sort of like, hello. But if anything, it does further underscore the fact. And, above and beyond, other things, he clearly lived a particular form of Catholicism regularly. Obviously, he doesn't say it in every letter. He's just not that type of person. I know some people out there who would only ever write something that would always have to have something in there, no matter what the letter. So frankly, this is a lot more calmer than some people out there. I think I could name in my experience. But slightly more seriously, one of the things I think it most reveals, more interestingly, how can I put this, is that we get a little more about how he was as a father to his kids and how he talked with them. I think it's very notable that we don't really have many letters to Priscilla, but we have a lot of discussion about things he and Priscilla are doing. I think a lot of that relationship, as much as they want to share it, and maybe as much as she just wanted to share it, was because she probably could have had a column going like, no, you're not including this one to me, or things like that, where a sense that there was a certain sort of the bonding. I had completely forgotten that they had gone on a trip to Italy together. Maybe
part of that is just, didn't she live nearby?
Yeah.
So it might just be there was nothing to write because he was just going to see her the next day or something.
Right.
So it could just be that. And I do feel like he probably talked to Christopher a lot more about his work. And that's in the first edition. I forget if the introduction is in the expanded one, but the Humphrey Carpenter is like, we included the ones that talk about his work, basically.
Right.
Which is why the Edith Bratt stuff isn't in there, which is also, I think, maybe get back to this, but that's a weird omission, I think, to cut out all of that. Even if it is personal, there's a lot of other really personal stuff in here anyway.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Yeah, no, Oriana, if you wanted to.
In some of these new letters to the kids, in particular, Michael.
Yeah, that stood out for me.
There's a bunch of that, and talking about like faith. And again, we have some truly just horrible to read opinions about women in here, but whatever. Like we knew that. So it's just like annoying to see again. But I guess I could have assumed, but I feel like Tolkien, there's a letter in particular, 294A, to Michael Tolkien in 1967. So I feel like I did not realize Tolkien, it seems like he was extremely opposed to a lot of the Vatican II stuff, which, like, it's not surprising, but it is like, oh, damn. Like, again, I'm glad he had the time he did, and I'm glad that time did not overlap with our time. Yeah. Just because, wow, just...
It's interesting. We generally and accurately, consider Tolkien a conservative small c writer. I say small c because there is such a thing as the Conservative Party and aka the Tories, and he is not necessarily one-to-one with them. I think one of his more interesting ones, when you can say he's on the, sort of the anti-power broker trip, you could say, for Oriana there against the Oxford City Planning, which he inveigles against a few times, and he mentions one local official in particular. He says, and this one's a Tory. I'm going like, okay. So, to his credit, he wasn't like, necessarily taking a side one way. But we do see these weird divisions. Like, for instance, like on the one hand, you will get, and again, this is a mix. Some of the letters are new and some of them are new to us, at least, and some of them were already in there. But it's good to get a reminder of the whole about how, for instance, he will speak rather movingly about how, dare I say, with a certain applicability to the present, that's not allegory, that is all too relevant, about how he's reacting against people saying, like, he's not directly quoting somebody, he's like reading opinions at the end of World War II about people saying, like, let's kill all the Germans completely and just burn them out. And he's going like, what in the world, and he calls that out for what it is. He just he basically there. It's really interesting to me that we get, or I'm reminded of again, because again it's a mix of new and old stuff that you pointed out, Oriana, about like his opinions on imperialism. He clearly really hates the British Empire. I found it really remarkable, his anti-patriotic sentiments at the end of the war. And I thought it's like, damn, that's some vicious good stuff there. I thought that was really remarkable. So you have that, but to throw in at the same time, you've also got this one letter where basically it's sort of like, oh, you really liked Franco in Spain, did you?
What?
Did I miss that? I think I...
Oh, it's in there. It's more by implication. He doesn't go around singing his praises, but he basically is sort of talking about how there was this one guy who would become it was first from South Africa, another guy who would become eventually convert to Catholicism, who had rescued some nuns who were still killed during the Civil War. And the framing of it all made it seem like, it was clearly he was not on the red side when it came to the Spanish Civil War. It's like, okay, and there it is there. So,
which is a different thing from being a Francoist.
No, I'm not trying to draw one-to-one here. Just that you can't sort of, it's interesting. It's interesting what hyper-patriotism he detests and the other ones that he would excuse, because Lord knows Franco was his own form of Spanish hyper-patriot. We could go on. But I'm sorry, you were going to say something earlier, Jared.
There's a few letters, not that many, surprisingly, where he talks about basically being an anarchist.
Yeah.
And I wanted more, say more about that, because, like, that is so interesting, and he doesn't really get into it except to differentiate it from, like, the bomb-throwing kind, which, of course, like, we knew you weren't that kind, dude.
Right.
But, like, what...
Imagine if.
Because I think it's one letter he's like, I'm either for anarchy or monarchy, and not constitutional monarchy. And that's such an interesting dichotomy, and, like, why those two, and how do you make that jump? Like, why are those the two okay ones when those are pretty different things?
Yeah, it's very hard to horseshoe theory that one.
Yeah, especially, I feel like Tolkien had not had much Congress with any, even like sort of the peacenik anarchist types, because I think he would have really hated how impossible it is to get anything done in anarchist circles. I think he would have detested the voting on every little thing and subgroups to name the subgroups, that kind of thing that anarchist movements kind of tend to turn into. I feel like a lot of the anarchy thing was just tax avoidance.
He complains about taxes so much.
The tax.
He hates taxes.
Oh my God. And I understand that, he was not a wealthy man by any stretch for really any of his life. But oh my God, dude, I know it's more onerous over there than it is here in the States, but wow, so much complaining about taxes, and I have to, do all this work and sell all this stuff and degrade myself just to pay the tax bill.
Yeah. I feel like the anarchy stuff, because it's not in the letters, it's look at, I don't know, the Shire, which is kind of an anarchist society in a lot of ways, and how that runs, which is basically just families kind of policing their own, and there's not much of there's a mayor, but what does he do? He makes speeches at banquets. There's 4 sheriffs or whatever it is, 12, I forget. There's a small number of them. It's very loose, families are the only government, really. And is that what he's looking for? I don't know. And that's why I wanted so much more, even if it would probably annoy me. Not that I hate anarchists or anything. I don't have. It's just I want to know his thoughts about this.
Yeah, I mean, I was reminded of in the letter, which we talked about a year ago, because we did some delving in the letters, so it was helpful on the Gollum episode we did, because there was reminding myself of the material again, and again reminding myself that there's that murder mystery in the Tooks that took place, and it's sort of it's the correlate of that is, well, wait, who solved that mystery? Did anyone? Or was it just simply, let's just let it go? It was interesting. His choice of wording in turn, especially, is both interesting, both in terms of the politics of creation, what he thinks of politics. The word that he used more than once across various letters, so this clearly was a concept that really bugged the hell out of him, was regimentation.
Yeah.
I thought that was very interesting. And it clearly partially draws on his own army experience, which you could tell he was not really fond of. I mean, he went through it, but he very much didn't see it as a place to be. For all that, he had connections in it. It's clearly something that, he didn't come out of it feeling 100% positive. It was clearly something he had suffered through. And I think the comment that he makes once about how he wrote the original, piece of legendarium, as he's telling someone later, it might have been Waldman, might have been someone else, about how it was all written in places where just miserable and slimy and just smut everywhere and things like this. You get a sense of this guy in the corner going rise above it, and scribbling out what he does, and I don't blame him on that front. But this sense of again, regimentation is what he uses, this idea of being too organized, which ties into Jared's point. It's almost like he's more anti that than pro anarchism, if you get my drift. So to a degree.
Yeah, it felt like a lot of what he was objecting to in terms of government was the way that any political scientists out there are free to correct me on this because I don't know what I'm talking about. I will admit that up front. But the way that a modern bureaucracy is applied to the British class structure, so that regimentation, these rules, when they're just kind of slotted into a pre-existing society, ended up making people like Tolkien, who was not officer material, as he admits himself, putting them in positions of power. And then there's all the people, all the Samwises, who are better than him at all of this stuff, and they're just the grunts. So I think some of what he's reacting to, at least initially, is this kind of blind application of the rules in a way. It is structural inequality, and he just decides that a structure produces inequality by existing, which is not necessarily true,
right?
But it feels like that's what he's heading towards, and maybe that's why he's either anarchy, where there's no structure producing inequality, or the most unequal thing ever, just having a monarch who's in charge.
Right.
And there's no intermediary.
Yeah.
We should cover other aspects of the letters, because this could literally fill the whole episode if we really let ourselves. So maybe some shifting of other things. So even if we don't want to get too deeply into the quote unquote Catholicism as such, I mean, there's some, especially in one of the newer letters, I was really intrigued and surprised. Especially, well, I'll let you tell the story, Jared, of the film star that he runs into at a certain point. That's its own fun thing. and that'll be a teaser. We'll get to that. But the thing the one letter that really stood out for me, I'm looking right here. This would have been, yes, this is one of the new letters. This is one of the ones to Christopher Tolkien when he saw the film. I guess it's called this. Yes, Song of Bernadette.
Oh yeah.
That was so interesting.
Yeah.
Because he clearly does not talk about mass culture much in his letters. We know he had certain opinions on. Apparently, he liked the Marx Brothers and things like that, and so it's not like he didn't have any opinions on these at all. But it's very notable that Song of Bernadette gets a big shout out as a big sort of massive faith-based hit for him. Is the best way to put it.
He talks about it over multiple letters.
Yeah.
He does. Yeah, it really hit him and her story. And I forgot to do some looking up on this earlier. This is for those of you out there who are like, what is the Song of Bernadette? This was a 1943 film. I'm doing a very quick thing on Wikipedia right now, so we'll throw in a link to that. Basically, and the idea was that she is the one. She basically, when you hear about Lourdes, France, well, she's the reason why Lourdes, France is the best way to put it. So because of the visions that she experienced there in 1858, and it stars Jennifer Jones. Vincent Price is in it. I hope he plays an evil guy because I'm trying to imagine Vincent Price is a good guy in the scenario.
He
it's
plays
not working.
Mary.
Yeah, it's like
The range.
yeah, exactly. Lee J. Cobb. So it's things like this, and I'm also noticing here on the thing that the theatrical release poster was like Norman Rockwell. Hey, go big! So that's kind of big. Anyway, so we don't want to sidetrack completely into that, but the point is, it is dare I say, a typical Hollywood product, but due to what it is, it seems to have hit him incredibly hard. And as Jared noted, he did not let the story go. Once it's introduced, it doesn't quite go away.
Yeah. I always personally find it very fascinating and even moving when somebody is able to really talk eloquently about their experiences with religion. And it doesn't matter what religion, if they're able to explain why it means this much to them, I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And he talks about the Song of Bernadette a lot. He talks about Lourdes a lot. And he also, in multiple letters, gets into what he finds so fulfilling is the wrong word, but like what really gets to him about Catholicism itself is the Eucharist. Like the actual moment of transformation where the bread and the wine become the flesh and blood of Christ. And that's not because the letters about Song of Bernadette, I think, are all new.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's something that I had never, it's not something I put together before, but he seems to have been extremely interested in the intersection of God with the mortal world. Which kind of, like, we've talked about it in other contexts before, about like Gandalf being incarnated, like all of these, like the spiritual choosing to put on material form. And I don't know that I have an end point for this, but I think that's part of why Song of Bernadette was so fascinating, because it was like, here's this girl who is so caught up in the visions that she has that it like changes the world. Like now the sanctuary at Lourdes is a huge pilgrimage destination and healing happens there and all of that. So he saw it as proof of like the miraculous intruding on everyday life, even though it was just a movie, which he's aware of. He doesn't like take it as documentary.
Right. Yeah. Thankfully.
but oh God, I already know people who take faith-based movies as documentary, and I hate it when they do that. But it's just an aspect of his spiritual life that does kind of feed into the work, where he'll get really interested in the mechanics of like how a spirit remembers the body that it had.
Oh my God. And how you create the new one. And, the process of becoming incarnate is, you know.
It's a motif that is there, and it wasn't, for me anyway, wasn't really fully unlocked until reading the new letters where he gets into this.
Yeah, and then something else that sort of leapt at me too, I can't recall, I think this was one of the newer letters, I should have made a mark for this one. It's a later letter, if I remember right, and I believe it was again to Michael. It was definitely, if it wasn't him, it was to Christopher, but I'm pretty sure it was Michael. He seems to be, at least, maybe whatever letters like these when it came to, shall we say, personal affairs, that Christopher was more happy to include the ones to Michael rather than to him and all that. So, and it is worth remembering that Christopher did, after all, he and his first wife did have a divorce, and so I'm sure there are plenty of thoughts from Tolkien about divorce in the Catholic Church that we don't know about, let's say. So, and maybe for a reason. So, in any event, thing that sort of leapt out to me was the interesting bit where he almost goes into the historicity, you could say, of how the body is treated in terms of it being, sexuality is something that is meant to be sacred or not. And what's interesting is that you kind of expect him to be like, almost a stereotypical sort of like everyone's chaste. It's more sort of like, no.
Sex is good, actually. Yeah.
It's really nice. And he sort of identifies that you can react too badly to things and just, go to extreme round. I'm like, that's an interesting balance. That's not something necessarily that you would pick up on in his fictional writings necessarily. But if you allow for subtext, it reminds me of, even though ironically it sort of reads to me a little more Catholic, the sentiment, the idea that you can sort of an earthly pleasure there. In terms of what it made me think of, in terms of what he was talking about, was Milton, very much an arch Protestant, in Paradise Lost, when he talks about, hey, Adam and Eve enjoying each other in Garden of Eden, what a wonderful thing. That sort of vibe, which I thought was like, okay, again, as Oriana has pointed out, Tolkien was no feminist. Oh God, no. But
what's interesting is that maybe I'm accidentally making this up. I don't know, but I feel like there's an early letter where he's like, women aren't as introspective as men and all of that.
Yeah.
But I feel like later on, as the letters progress, it's not that it becomes a feminist or anything, but he starts talking more in egalitarian terms. Not a ton. I don't want to oversell this, but I feel like the early letters where he's talking about this, I think, are when he's still very much friendly with C.S. Lewis, who was pretty misogynist, which is a whole other topic. But like C.S. Lewis will talk about like manly as a synonym for good. And I don't think Tolkien ever does that. He sees femininity as having its own value, which C.S. Lewis did not. So we're already a little better. We're doing okay.
And it does remind me, sorry to interrupt, it just suddenly struck me right now that that this letter that I just mentioned that talks about this is around the same era as when he's attempting to write. Because remember, it's a bit of a syncretic story from a lot of drafts of Aldarion and Arendis, which is, kind of his boldest move on this front to try and sort of say like, hey, wait, there's more than a type thing there. Anyway, I'll stop there. I also don't want to talk over Oriana since we were talking about, what do you think of women?
No, Oriana's too personally invested in this. She can sit this one out while we talk.
This one out. I should sit this one out.
Yeah, I'm not saying like, oh, by the end he's like corresponding with Gloria Steinem or whatever. But I do think
I want to see those letters though.
Oh, right. As he gets further away from his really deep friendship with Lewis, which on the one hand, like, very personally fulfilling for them both for a while, that's nice. But as he gets further away from that, I do think he starts to develop more of a sense of women as not just being like rejected men, like they're the ones that didn't make it to the final.
Yeah, it's like they have a place in this world, and it is a very specifically like prescribed place, which is by men's side, but not leading or anything like that.
Yeah, like he's not. I think he talks about women preachers at one point, and it's like, oh my god, I was so disgusted. I don't know, barely stay inside my own skin or whatever it is.
It's like, all right, man, all right.
Okay, yeah, no, we get it. But it's also like it was more. Unlike, I keep comparing him to C.S. Lewis because, like, that's the other Inkling whose views on women I know the best. Ugh.
Which is fair.
Sorry, I have, like, an entire rant about C.S. Lewis that keeps trying to come out, and I'm trying to keep it in because this is not a Lewis podcast. He's capable of seeing women as having value on their
Yes.
Like he appreciates a lot of women writers.
Yes.
He doesn't see women writing novels as like a dog walking on its hind legs. He appreciates a ton of stuff about women and doesn't see them as
only empty receptacles.
Yeah. He talks about equality a couple of times, and I can't remember. I wish I'd marked it, but he does talk about it as like there are some kinds of equality that we should absolutely have, kind of vibe. Not the exact wording, because I don't think he would.
Right. Yeah. But I think it's notable that we do have a fair amount of letters to people like, on the one hand, his relative, his aunt Jane Neve, who I think whose opinions he very much valued. I mean, the book, the Tom Bombadil poetry collection, wouldn't exist without her thoughts on it.
Mm-hmm.
And
I thought that was so sweet. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, that really was great, seeing that evolve. And then also things like Naomi Hutchison, Richardson, who was clearly a very dedicated reader of his. There were a couple of other folks in there, and then of course Pauline Baines, who we just absolutely thought, especially I loved again, I can't remember if it had been the earlier edition or not, the letter about the person who had done the initial art, and boy was he pissed about that.
Yeah.
So like, finally a much better artist. So, and that type of recognition I think is really good to see. But there's so much to unpack there. And again, so much about what we know about, the woman he lived with, Edith, comes essentially through his take on it. And there's a lot that we don't fully know, or at least because we don't have her words on it, for better or for worse. It could be something she was just never interested in. But I do get a sense that he seemed to always allow for the fact that she had been through a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And that he was part of it is maybe the best way to put it. I thought it was very interesting, that one late letter where he talks about how over the length of their relationship, how their youthful love was always a good memory for them, even as they had some really bad troughs and things that went through. And I'm like, okay, there's a lot to unpack there, which doesn't necessarily need to be spelled out. We can all think of our own equivalents, but I thought that was very, some people progress never seeing that through life. We can all think of people like that too. So in terms of accounting, maybe shifting a bit to other subjects. Well, I love the various interactions with fans in all their range. I think it's, he clearly did not know what to think of his, deplorable cultist entirely. And I love the constant references to sort of like, my nose is, cannot resist sweet incense. He uses that more than once. I thought that is lovely, lovely metaphor. And, how appropriate for him too, as a Catholic too, taking that in, that he was associated with Mass. So, but I love things, whether it's the Holland meeting that he goes to, the one time he goes to. Oh my God.
He's like, I don't speak Dutch. Am I supposed to talk in Dutch? I don't know. And it's like, oh, buddy, come on. They all speak English.
Yeah, they do. The kerfuffle over maggot soup, which I thought was amazing. Yeah. That was really lovely. I love the bit about again, we're mixing old and new letters here. So I'm just these are things I remind of. The bit that he got during the war years, or just after him, from the young kid in America, was like, gee whiz, I love your work. It's like, isn't it wonderful that American boys say gee whiz?
Yeah.
I really love that. And I also liked where, especially as time went on, he realized, my time is probably getting more and more limited.
Ooh,
and he had to be like, sorry. But it was interesting to who he would still give some longer responses to. I noticed one or two of them would be like, one was a priest, I assume a Catholic priest. So he'd probably be like, oh yeah, sure. Things like that. So he set aside the time for it. And I did also, and then there's that very long letter to, what's his name? Rand, something like that. That was it. And that very long letter, of course, which is much like Waldman's letter, gives a lot of information, even if it's recapitulation, just to get a sense of things. It's like, here's how he thinks of it. But I also like things like, the exchanges with Auden, which are up and down, depending on what's going on.
Oh, God.
Those are things.
Oh, that made me so uncomfortable. Like, not like because they're like, I get really uncomfortable when I read people like passive aggressively trying to correct other people. I hate it so much. So having him try to very politely be like, Auden, you messed up when you said my wife's sitting room was ugly. It's like,
which is hilarious. He had been trashing that house anyway, and the circumstances of the move.
It's like, I'm allowed to, but you're not allowed to. I get that. Well, because it was his wife's sitting room. Tolkien can trash the house, but he's not going to trash his wife's sitting room.
That one room that no one else goes in.
Nobody else it was so, I had such a hard time with it. It's like cringe comedy, kind of.
And I had forgotten that Forrest Ackerman, of all people, had come and actually met him in England. That was tripping me. I'm going like, oh boy, that's a weird combination of aesthetics right there. And then the whole thing about the failed initial attempt of the film. Oh boy, I remembered that, but it was seeing him just go off was sort of like, I don't blame you. I did like, and I think this was one of the newer letters, him talking about, well, United Stardust got the rights, but whoever so long. I love he must have been so happy retrospectively, his shade in the afterlife. It's like that he was dead before any of those films came out. He would have hated whatever happened. In some respects, I hate to have to say this to anybody, you died at the right time.
He would have. I do think he would have hated no matter what.
Yes.
He would have hated any adaptation. Yeah. Because there's so many letters, but especially the one where he's picking apart the Zimmerman guy's screenplay, where he's like, this is not like that. And it's like, okay, you know that, but is that in the book?
Yeah.
Or is that just in your head?
Good point.
And also, like, throughout, it's a different medium. Like,
yeah, it's a different medium. And there's a lot of this is not to say his criticisms aren't fair. Like in the screenplay, apparently there's like eagles taking them wherever they need to go. And it's like, well, why even have the story at that point? Stuff like that, where this is totally fair. This is in the book. If you thought about it 5 minutes, you would get it. But there's other things, and I can't remember an example now. I didn't mark this letter, but it's things like, well, it would never happen that way because of metaphysics that aren't in Lord of the Rings that inform it, but aren't.
Yeah.
But there's Silmarillion material which wasn't out. So you can't be that persnickety about it, but you're gonna be, apparently.
Of course, that and like him suggesting that there be no dialogue in the movie. Like he's like, oh, if it could just be like some voiceover and the images, that would okay. Because he quite liked the concept art.
I will say, I think a silent movie adaptation of Lord of the Rings would be very interesting.
Yeah.
It would be interesting.
In the silent movie era when they had all these like expressionist techniques at their disposal.
Yeah.
But that's an aside. That's not...
Yeah, the book came out when it did. In terms of adaptation, that reminded me of something that leapt out at me. Now, obviously, and I always think this is interesting, that legendary lost mid-50s adaptation of Lord of the Rings for radio that was done, which anyhow, he clearly did not like it.
Oh, yeah.
You got the couple letters there. What's interesting to me is that there is no mention at all, unless I missed it, I could have missed it, of the 1968 BBC radio version of The Hobbit. And it's sort of like, that one has since been apparently was lost and then recovered, and there's been some debate about did the estate have a hand in that? But I think it's really interesting that he didn't care or and all that. It seemed like a fairly high profile thing to do. It'd be interesting that he had no thoughts in it whatsoever. Kind of odd.
Yeah.
They weren't included
or they were included for a reason. Yeah, it could well be.
I always want to know what we're not reading, because this is highly curated.
Yeah.
Keeping an eye on the time, some last things before I wrap up, maybe to just bring up here something that other things leapt out to me. As Oriana said, he was always apologizing. But I did like the senses of just sort of like getting a sense of the time pressures and what they were at what particular points in time and how things changed. Sort of like as he moved towards retirement, as he was sort of saying more than once, saying that if he didn't have, this gets into the money issue again, but still, if he didn't have even some extra money, regardless of what the tax man took, that he would have, it would have been a pretty penurious life, it sounds like. So it's weirdly lucky for him.
Now, is that something that we should take at face value, or is he being hyperbolic? I genuinely don't know, because he does like complaining about not having money.
This is true.
But it could be true. It could very well be true. I don't want to, say that Oxford takes care of its own.
He does specifically say about he wasn't in the Oxford pension plan, which I found very fascinating.
Did you miss a deadline? What
did he not want to pay in? Yeah,
maybe that was it. He opted out and then was like, "Hold on a second," and they were like, "But you."
I mean, he had a lot of kids to take care of. He may not have been able to spare that money.
Also,
that's
life. True.
Yeah, that was kind of my thought on the matter. Yeah, like it was designed for a different sort of a classically unmarried Oxford dawn, as opposed to somebody who actually had people living on his support. So then among other things too, there was at this point I actually want to turn it over, Jared. Talk about the celebrity moment. That really is great. You were the one who made call on it, so it is wonderful.
Might as well just read it. I don't know.
It's not that fantastic.
Long. Yeah. An amusing incident occurred in November when I went as a courtesy to hear the last lecture of the series of his given by the professor of poetry, Robert Graves. A remarkable creature, entertaining, likable, odd, bonnet full of wild bees, half German, half Irish, very tall, must have looked like Siegfried Sigurd in his youth, but an ass. On his side, Robert Graves definitely looked like Siegfried when he was young. I've seen the photos.
Nice.
It was the most ludicrously bad lecture I have ever heard. After it, he introduced me to a pleasant young woman who had attended it, well but quietly dressed, easy and agreeable, and we got on quite well. But Graves started to laugh, and he said, "It is obvious neither of you has ever heard of the other before." Quite true. And I had not supposed that the lady would ever have heard of me. Her name was Ava Gardner, but it still meant nothing till people more aware of the world informed me that she was a film star of some magnitude, and that the press of pressmen and storm of flashbulbs on the steps of the schools were not directed at Graves, and certainly not at me, but at her.
I love it.
Right? Like, you meet Ava Gardner and you don't know? I mean, I'm sure if I saw if I saw Ava Gardner walking down the street, I probably wouldn't recognize her either. But
especially now. Anyway,
but once somebody told me that was Ava Gardner, I would be like, oh my god, I just met Ava Gardner.
Holy shit.
Maybe you didn't know. It's interesting though. There's a little bit in there that sort of ties in. He had what I think it's John Scalzi's been saying lately about how he has awareness that even in Oxford itself, he's essentially convention famous. He doesn't phrase it that way.
Yeah.
But he has that awareness that he knows that what fame he has, he sort of regularly has some, is still one that's limited. And he was right to do that. You know, he wasn't thinking, I mean, the world of himself in that regard. It was just one of those things that he knew he had made a splash, but he knew just even looking around his actual, town and college that he lived in, there people like, yeah, whatever, and all that. So, and I thought that was like, that's a reasonably balanced head on his shoulders. There is something interesting in those ending years about how he recognizes more and more that there is a legacy he is literally leaving behind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He talks about wanting to see that he can outlive the thing so his kids don't have to pay death duties on him due to the trust, which apparently didn't happen because he didn't die. He died within that 7 years. He does that visit, and the exchanges with Rayner Unwin are really interesting, over time as he shifts from being the kid who initially wrote to be something like, oh, you're my main publisher guy now after Stanley goes and the honors and things that happens, about how he goes to Allen and Unwin's printing facilities and he learns about how most of it's for him.
Yeah,
I mean,
that was so. His relationship with Rayner, I loved watching that over the course of the letters. Yeah, it starts out as this little kid that loved his book, and then segues into like he comes over for tea and brings his kid to see Tolkien, and it's so sweet.
And it's like, oh, call me by my Christian name, and that's
I like that a lot,
sweet.
Especially as that was after like decades of knowing each other.
Decades,
and so,
right? Please call me Ronald.
Yeah. That stood out to me. It really did. So I don't have much to add. There's not really a wrap-up point you can give because, again, it's a collection of letters that illustrates a bunch of things. Much can be said. It's a life in all its ways, that some of which we recognize, some of which we're like, oh God, and things like that. And then we just take it all in. But it does, it does have a lot of information that still plays into Tolkien's written work, a huge amount. It's some small details, other things will still be talked about. So I have nothing much more to add myself. Are there any finer thoughts from either of you, though, on this book?
Okay, here's my final thought, which is characteristically stupid and very light. So I don't know if you guys noticed the extent to which, not in his like later years, but there is a point at which Tolkien, in his letters, particularly to his children, he talks about yard work a lot.
Yeah,
and,
you're right.
Wow, what a parent thing to do, to just talk at great length to your children about what you're going to do with the cherry trees. I think it just seems universal. Like my parents do that. It's always like, here's what we're doing with the yard. He was like, here's what we're doing with the garden.
Yeah. When I sent my mom like the official announcement of my book or whatever it was, maybe I forget what it was, but she was like, oh, that sounds cool. Have I told you about my tomatoes? I was like,
yes.
Yes, Mom. I mean, so not recently, but I've heard about them.
People in your life to keep you humble. As we like gas you up constantly, your mom is just like, these tomatoes. I mean, you wrote a book, dear. But I cultivated these.
Yeah, let me tell you about my garden.
It's just fascinating that's just everywhere, including J.R.R.
This isn't, I don't know if this is a thought so much as talking about Christopher Tolkien is always like, it's getting weirder and weirder for me. And I'm trying to figure out why, but I didn't keep track of this, and I wish I had a tally mark kind of thing, but he addresses his children so often as like my dearest Mick from Michael or my dearest Priscilla or whatever. As I recall, and maybe this is confirmation bias, I don't know, he seemed to say my dearest to Christopher Tolkien and nobody else, or more to him than anybody else.
I think it's very interesting that he says that for Christopher more so than his oldest son, who actually became a priest. You'd think that he would be the one to have his references, given how strong a Catholic he was, but...
Yeah, well, it says, I mean, I know he loved all his kids, or I say I know, I don't, how would I actually know? But it does feel like Christopher was the favorite. Not necessarily treated better, but he's the one who gets to hear about so much of the creative work. And he's the one that Tolkien would write to in Old English and stuff like that. And he doesn't do that to Michael or John or Priscilla. And it's not uncomfortable exactly to be like seeing that.
Oh, you got the kiss from Daddy.
But it is a little like, so the favorite is this. I'm sure is this a favorite son, and the favorite son is the one who has control over the literary estate.
Mm-hmm.
And how does, like, okay, sure, I don't. This isn't like a thought. This is just kind of a weird vibe of like, well, the favorite son is the one controlling what we see of his father,
right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So. Mm-hmm. Not that I'm wishing that somebody who hated Tolkien had gotten
no,
but like. Again, as mentioned earlier, like this is curated. What are we not seeing? Even in the expanded edition, what are we not seeing?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
What has been left out because of this kind of maybe a lack of critical distance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we will see.
Maybe I don't want to know. Maybe I don't want to see what has been left out.
We're saving us for ourselves, and all that.
Yeah,
so
but things like Christopher Tolkien maybe not wanting the world to know what his father and mother were saying to each other during their courtship. I get that, and I, on some level, respect it. But it's also like, if this is the central relationship of Tolkien's life, it affected so much of his work with the Luthien and Beren stuff. Not to leave that out on the grounds that it's not heavy air quotes not related to the work is like, again, like I respect their wishes, I guess, but it's also that's not unrelated. And if you want a complete picture of this author, gotta know a little more.
And also we're now we've moved past the lifetime of the author and the author's children.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So no offense to the grandchildren. But
at a certain point, it'll be interesting to see where and how the family trust, if they do so, decide to open up more to share. And again, if there is more to share, we can always allow for the fact that maybe they're just all the moves early times.
Yeah,
really
you
isn't
move
relevant.
stuff. You move. I can't even tell you having moved across the country twice and up the country once in the last 3 years. Oh my God. I can tell you how much you lose in a move.
Yeah. So even if it wasn't as great distances, it's still moving. It's still something. So,
and he was not an organized person anyway. So
no, maybe that's the way to end it. It's all on her. But here, chronologically, is the best we'll get. So, looking at the next time, the choice of topic comes around to Oriana. What are we talking about next time?
I want to talk about how Peter Thiel is wrong about Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. That's that's very specific. But more broadly, I want to talk about the tech baron obsession with the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien, and
that's good.
What do we do about that? And also what are the various ways in which they are wrong about everything and trying to create the torment nexus? What's the equivalent of the torment nexus in, I guess, the ring? They're just making rings of power all over the place, even though you're not supposed to.
When they identified with, they thought they were Gandalf, they turned out to be Saruman, but we'll have more to say about that next time for sure, and a very, very good topic indeed to look at. So, until that time, we thank you all very much for listening. We hope you're enjoying your start of this year. It may be a crazy year, but hopefully we'll all get through it in one piece, and all that. We will have much more to say. More Tolkien news is coming, like it or not, later in the year as certain adaptations finally start to hove into view, unless things get rescheduled. So we will see what emerges and all that. So one may be a certain TV series, but another one's a movie. So we will see. And we'll get to that then. In the meantime, thank you all very much for listening. As always, please do, as we mentioned at the start of the episode, consider contributing to the Megaphonic Patreon. You'll be able to join our Discord for the entire site and join the Tolkien discussion area on that, where we always are. Memes, other things going on. We always love to hear feedback. As always, go ahead and send things to By-The-Bywater at megaphonic.fm, and megaphonic.fm/By-The-Bywater is how to find us online, along with links to the episode guide and much more besides. Spread the word. We are on social media at various spots. We are all too easily found in various spots, at least if you're me. The point is, follow us as we do for just more individual notes, and again, the main social social media feed right now is By-The-Bywater over at Blue Sky. So, until next time, we will see you then. Until then.